Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Navigating Data Privacy in Canada, Understanding Compliance, Governance, and the Law. I'm Teresa Resick, Director of Webinars here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are AIIM's Bob Larrabee, and from Box we have Josh Rosenberg and Joel Benavides. And Box is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. And as we get started, I just wanted to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. By joining our webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open, close, or resize the different windows. Across the bottom of your screen is the list of all of the widgets that we have available to you today. Group Chat is one of those widgets, and you can open that by clicking on the icon that's along the bottom. And with this Group Chat, you'll be able to text chat with each other, as well as a few of us from AIIM. Do ask questions of the speakers throughout the hour using the Q&A feature, and that's to the left side of your screen. And we will hold these questions until the end, where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. You can also use this feature to ask for technical assistance. You can download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the resources list, that's to the right of the slide area. There's also a few other documents and links in there to help you learn more about today's topic. Just click in there at any time, and that resource will open in a new browser tab, and you can save that and read it after our webinar. And at the end of the webinar, a brief survey will open in your browser, and it's also in the icons across the bottom of your screen. And I'd greatly appreciate it if you'd take a few moments to offer your feedback and to suggest other topics for us to cover. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. Now I'd like to introduce the panel of speakers that we have with us today. And Bob Larrabee is the Vice President and Chief Analyst of Market Intelligence here at AIIM. Bob is an expert in the application of advanced technologies and process improvement to solve business problems and enhance business operations. With over 30 years of industry experience, including product management, R&D, marketing, sales, and education, his passion is to share his knowledge and experience with organizations seeking to improve their operations, embrace technology, and drive their business forward. Josh Rosenberg is the Head of Information Governance Product Marketing at Box. Prior to joining Box, he worked in marketing at the Full Circle Insights and at Scalar, and received his MBA from Santa Clara University. And Joel Benavides is Managing Director of Global Legal Services at Box, where he leads Box's legal service strategy and outreach efforts. He has over 15 years of experience in the high technology sector, including the impact of data protection regulation on global data flows. So right now I'm going to turn things over to Bob Larrabee to begin our talk today. Bob?
Well, thank you, Teresa, and thank you, Josh and Joel. It's great to be here with you all, and of course all of our friends across Canada. This is really a hot topic, the idea of governance and compliance, and really the most important thing, I think, or one of the most important things, is you really have to understand what the regulations are. That's the first step. Really, you've got to understand what it is. And so in Canada, of course, you've got things like PIPEDA, which is the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, and then, of course, this one, PCMLFTA. Don't you love all these letters, right? But it's Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act. These are national regulations that you have to be aware of in Canada. Then there's provincial acts. One that I picked out was coming out of Quebec, which is the regulation chapter A-2.1 R2, which is the regulation respecting the distribution of information and the protection of personal information. So not only do you have to be aware of national regulations, but also provincial regulations, and in some cases local regulations. There may actually be regulations even more localized than the provincial regulations. And then if you are an entity that transacts business on a global perspective, then you have to be aware of global regulations. And now the hot one, the real hot one, is GDPR that's coming out of the European Union, the General Data Protection Regulation. Everybody's talking about that one. And so if you're dealing with businesses or transacting business in the European Union, then you really have to be aware of that one. So really knowing the regulations is essential. You know, what is it that you have to do in relation to those? And so information governance plays a huge role in this. So you have to support compliance and the business simultaneously, right, as all part of this. So you talk about things like collaboration as part of business, right? These are things that you want to do in your business activities. You want to be able to collaborate. You want to be able to automate processes when possible and wherever possible. You have to deal with information security. And, of course, today, things like mobility. We're a mobile workforce. Think about it. We use our mobile devices. It could be things like your mobile phone. Or maybe it's a mobile device, an iPad, for example, that you carry with you. And, of course, these are things that we use every day. We access information. We create information on these devices. And so we have to be aware of these things. Information governance and creating our policies and procedures around these devices. So we support the business through these devices and the use of these devices, but our policies and procedures, we have to look at compliance in relation to these. And how does compliance align with all of these different regulations that we're dealing with, so PIPEDA and so on. So part of the challenge also is, in order to be able to support all of this, is we have to look at how employees are working today and how they might work differently going forward, right? So look at it from their eyes. How are they doing the work today? How could they be working tomorrow? So collaboration is key to decision-making in our businesses, and information sharing is a vital part of that process. Yet, in the research that we've done at AIIM, and that's a major part of my role at AIIM as chief analyst is to do research, you know, we found that 85% of businesses are still using email for collaboration, right? So they're sharing information, but the tool that they use, the tool of choice, is still email. Not really the best choice when we look at this. Email for a collaboration tool, not really the best choice. A lot of better options out there, a lot of options that are much more secure and actually much more productive. And so what I'd like to do at this point is really bring in Joel and Josh. And guys, what do you see in relation to all of this? There's all these regulations, national, local, there's these global regulations, and people are using email to collaborate? Really? What do you think?
Thanks, Bob, and thanks for that great intro about the topic. You definitely set the stage for why this is important, and you know, Joel can certainly attest to this as well, but compliance is a really tricky thing, and the stat you see on this slide about over half of senior management accidentally emailing a sensitive file to the wrong person. Think about that in terms of a PIPEDA, for example. What if an HR manager emails a request for leave or a request to change insurance or something that has some personally identifiable information? It goes to the wrong person in the company. Maybe Gmail or Outlook automatically puts in an address of someone else, and they just don't notice it. That file's gone. That information's gone. You can't take it back, and that's definitely a violation of this compliance. So, yeah. So you have to think about, you know, how do you centralize where this content lives and how you share it? Email attachments are unsecure. Everybody, I think, understands this, but the question is, how do you move that out of email into a central content repository where you can share it out and govern it effectively? And Joel, I mean, how have you seen this from the sort of legal and compliance view?
Absolutely, I definitely agree. And thank you all to all the folks joining the webinar. It's great to be here, and thank you for your time. And absolutely, just like social media and the proliferation of applications on the web have transformed our personal lives, the same thing can be said for the enterprise. You know, today's digital enterprise has to have first and foremost, the imperative to protect the data that they are sharing, the ability to provide services. If you are, say, a local institution, a provincial institution, and you provide services to your constituents, or you are a private company that has, you know, affiliates throughout Canada, you may have affiliates throughout the rest of North America, the rest of the Americas, or abroad, it is imperative to not only provide access to the content in a secure and compliant way, but also to meet the regulations that apply to you at the federal level, the local federal level, the provincial level, as well as those regulations that apply to you by virtue of having personal data or personal information from your customers and their clients in the different sectors, whether it is financial, personal information, protected health information, and the like. So today's enterprise must, in my view, be able to meet these requirements. And the best way to go about it is really to set the foundations in the proper way where those foundations can be leveraged and you are able to take on complying with additional regulations wherever you may be operating.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bob, I'm gonna pass it back to you.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Management. That's incredible. That's incredible. And so, this is one of the things that we see. Businesses are digitally transforming their information, and things really they have to be kept up to date. And part of that, it's got to not just be kept up to date, the information, but it's got to be findable, right? And yet 50% of businesses that we've talked to said they have no integration between their file sync and share tools in their core applications. I find this incredible. There's this disconnect. There's this lack of connection between their core applications and their file sync and share tools, their content that's out there, this vital business applications, and this information that they need, right? This business critical information that they need. And as you pointed out, 58% of folks that you've talked to have inadvertently sent emails out to the wrong people. And so when we talk about file sync and share and we talk about linking these applications, what are you guys seeing? What do you think about this?
Yeah. Well, it goes back to basically what's your content management strategy. And there's definitely, I think, a big push in the enterprise, especially to really standardize on one content system. You want a place where you can do the basic sync and share use cases, collaborate, share on content, but you also need that same system to be a system of record. So you have to be able to set the right retention policies, make sure you can classify the content in the right way. And if you're able to do that, you really limit the exposure to some of these fines, that you could be subject to. So that 100K up there, that's basically what you can get fined if you knowingly violate breach notification requirements as part of PIPEDA. And this is just a small part of it. So think about if your content's all over the place in different systems, the likelihood of a breach goes up and up and up. And then these expenses just for this one sort of segment of the PIPEDA requirements, that's a lot that can add up over the years, especially if you're a small and medium-sized company or even if you're a large enterprise. You can't take back the bad press of a breach, let alone the fines that you have to pay for this stuff.
I definitely agree with that, Josh. And additionally, if you, as I mentioned earlier, if you are operating on an international basis, or even if you are a regional, a provincial business, say for example you run a small hotel chain in Canada, but you have tourists that come from the EU, so you have groups of tourists that come and stay at your hotel, and you are collecting their name, email, and credit card information. That's all personal data or personal information under the GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, which will come into effect at May 25th of 2018. And if you think that 100K is a lot of money, which obviously for all of us is a lot of money, for all businesses is a lot of money, think about what the GDPR exposure that you can have, which will be 20% of your gross revenue, or 4 million, whichever is the greatest. So, I'm sorry, 4% or 20 million, whichever is greatest. That is a significant amount and can bankrupt many businesses.
Yeah,
that's right.
It really, I think it goes to show that the risk that is out there, just from all the complexities of the different compliances, is pretty huge, and you have to take all this into account when you're building your strategy.
Yeah. Now, getting back, I just want to touch on that a little bit more. This 100,000, and the idea that you've got these violations. We were talking about the GDPR and we were talking about national violations, but there could also be additional fines, if I remember right, at the provincial level as well. So not only are you talking about these fines at a national level, but there could be fines compounded beyond this as well, if I remember right.
Surely. So yes, sure. So, Alberta, British Columbia, and Quebec have their own versions, their own personal information protection acts. And what they do, they do impose additional fines, and that is based on, again, if the information, for example, is related to health records and the like, every one of these provinces will subject the business which violates the provision to additional fines. And that's only the government imposed fine or regulatory fine. But think about also that you will be subject to potentially liability at the civil level, whereby the owner of that information may file a lawsuit against you, depending on what that violation is.
Yeah, and that's why it's even more important to take a step back and think about all the different provinces or countries or regions that you may be doing business with, or you may even come into contact with data from people who live there, and think about what some of the strictest requirements are, and if you can plan around that, it can really help you remain compliant in a much more, I don't want to say simple, but in a smoother way, just because you're planning for the worst case scenario, you're doing the hard legwork, and that means it'll trickle down and really apply to the rest of the compliances. So, in Europe, that's often, Germany. I know Canada has some really strict data privacy laws. Mm-hmm. And the more you can adhere to those, the easier it is to do business internationally.
So the way, if I may recommend, is certainly to take the way to look at this is to take a comprehensive approach and think about what are your data protection policies internally, and take a step back and foundationally who you are, what you're doing with the data, what kind of data you have, and what systems do you have in place to protect it, and when are you holding the data, for how long are you able to delete that data, after the required use period is over. That's an imperative requirement under the GDPR, for example, as it is in PIPEDA. You cannot have data sitting in your systems when the legal use of the data has expired. So if you have a customer or constituent that you have the need for the data, after that period has expired, you cannot just hold on to the data. And this is something that, you need, in order for you to do that, you need to understand where the data is sitting, what system it touches, and who else has access to such data in your sub-processor ecosystem.
And this, I think, gets back to a key point that both of you touched on. And from a personal standpoint, having talked to a lot of folks through AIIM, I find a lot of businesses kind of fall short on, and that's planning. That one word, planning, is that a lot of times businesses are in a reactive mode to something, and they'll rush to go fix whatever it is that they have to fix, but they don't necessarily take a planning position and look at the bigger picture. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, I would say that the companies we work with in regulated industries like financial services or life sciences, where they're doing drug trials, or in the public sector, for example, they often at least have more of a structure around the planning they're doing, because there are these specific regulations that apply only to that industry. But then when you're looking at data privacy, which really applies to all industries, many companies, say in hospitality or media and entertainment, for example, there's not necessarily a strict set of regulations for how they do business, for retaining data, or even in some cases for deleting it. So those types of companies have less of a plan, or don't even necessarily have the staff or the expertise to really build that compliance strategy. And that's why it's really, really important to, no matter what company you're in, you have to take all these global compliances into consideration. So if you're in a non-regulated industry and you're listening in, definitely recommend take a step back and look at things like PIPEDA and other global regulations that don't necessarily apply directly to the industry you're in, but apply to companies in general.
And I think this really points to the fact that today's CIOs, CISOs, and counsel, legal counsel, whether you are the general counsel, an agency, or somebody who has a responsibility for enforcing data privacy in an organization or assisting with that, is that you really have become a strategic partner to the business. It's not just somebody who is dealing with IT, but it's somebody who can actually have a significant influence in the charting the direction of the company, the different regions that you might be able to grow in, and working with the rest of ES staff, with management, to chart that strategy. And when you're called upon by the board to justify why you need the expenditure in these areas and what's going to be the ROI to the business based on that.
Yeah. And so, in both cases, what we were talking about, the idea of the fines here that we've been talking about, and then, of course, what we were talking about earlier, the idea of emails being sent inadvertently, this is a huge risk for many companies, a huge, huge risk for many companies. And this is where the whole idea of strategic planning really, I think, plays an important role. And so this leads us to the discussion about getting control over and securing information, right? As early as we possibly can in the process, I think, is an important part. A lot of companies are really at risk. And part of that risk is due to unsanctioned use of some of the tools that are out there that are in use by their employees. And some of the research that we did, it was really kind of interesting because people admitted, some of the folks that we talked to, they admitted, 65% of them, in fact, that they know tools are being used and they're unsanctioned. They're not approved by their employers. They know that they're not necessarily supposed to be using these tools, but they've got to get their job done. And this is kind of an interesting thing. One of the things that I think is a telltale sign that companies have to start looking forward and planning appropriately is exactly this. So what do you think? What do you see?
Yeah, it's a pretty common problem. And, that number of 120 plus up there, that's just a rough approximation. If you look at reports from Gartner or Forrester and the number of companies they take into consideration when they're putting out the Magic Quadrant or the waves for sync and share tools or for enterprise content management tools or, repositioning to, content management services and things like that, there are many, many options for people out there. So I put in 120. There's probably more than that, but think about it. Mm-hmm. You've got email systems, you've got chat systems, there's file sync and share tools, there's consumer tools that just come with something like a free Gmail account. There's a whole bunch of on-premise systems, legacy ECM. There's file servers and network shares. There's all sorts of places content can be. And if an end user can't get their job done, they're going to find a tool that lets them do that. So if you think about 10 years ago, one of the main use cases for Box was, I'm working from home. I need an easy way to access my content. So I'll throw it up there, and I'll be able to collaborate, share, view, and keep working without having to necessarily spend all the crazy time doing a proxy, getting into through a VPN, or even just not having access to data. So people will find ways to get work done. And the really great information governance strategies and plans that I've seen working at Box and with a lot of our customers are the ones where they talk to their line of business users, they figure out all the use cases and all the things that they're trying to do, and they bring in the right systems, the right policies to really set the guardrails around how they work with their content so they can do it in a secure and compliant way, but not impact how they get work done. And this is, at a fundamental level, the best thing you can do to eliminate that shadow IT threat.
Yeah, this is definitely a real problem. On the one hand, obviously, you have folks who are used to certain legacy applications, and they feel comfortable with them. They know them well, and then perhaps somebody in the organization is challenging that and saying, well, look, those are limited. They only have limited functionality, so we need something better than that, or we need something that has greater functionality. And then on the one hand, you may have, across the organization, people who adopt the newest technology available. They may not necessarily be very conscious of what the security measures that, does it have end-to-end encryption? Is the data encrypted in transit? Is it encrypted at rest? So in a rush to get things done in a more efficient way, perhaps in an unsupervised manner, they are using this unsanctioned technology, which can really have a detrimental impact on the organization. Think about it this way. Your company is contemplating a merger with another, with a target organization. You're trying to buy a company or merge with another entity. You need a secure data room to be able to do that, a virtual secure data room. And obviously there are some vendors you can go out there and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, or you can use a system similar to what Box has, whereby you can spin off as many of those as you need and avail yourself of the security measures that we have, for example. So these are really concrete examples of how you have to use technology that has been vetted and has been approved by the organization, the right approval levels in the organization. And all of this points to the whole idea that you have to operate with two principles in mind: security by design and security by default. Meaning that when you are designing either your own product, your services, or your operations, first and foremost, you need to have security and privacy built into those processes, operations, or systems. And by default means that you will only have access or seek access to personal information that you actually need, and not anything beyond that. So if you don't need it, you shouldn't have access to it.
Yeah, and building on that point, as you're looking at these types of systems and the easiest way to scale out how people access and manage and work with your information or files, you have to think about what is the level of security and compliance within that platform. So the easiest way to start meeting some of these global compliance needs, or provincial or local or Canada-wide needs, are the platforms you're using meeting those compliance standards? And so if you can find one system that has this all built in, but also has all the functionality your users want, it makes it much, much easier to remain compliant and to figure out your strategy without having to juggle different data silos. I mean, I've seen companies that have 2 or 3 page documents where it's basically like, if this file, then this system, if that file, then this system, and that's just not a way to grow. It's literally just creates a blocker to productivity.
Yeah, and I like the term that you used earlier, giving them systems that they can use, but with guardrails. Mm-hmm. Or I'm paraphrasing, I know, but it's the idea of you're setting up an environment that gives them the guardrails, the security, but allowing them to do what they need to do within those parameters.
Yeah, just think about if you're driving on the highway. I mean, last time I drove from Montreal to Toronto, it was like a 5-hour drive, but there's a barrier in between the lanes going different directions. You need something like that for safety and security, but it doesn't impact my ability to get back and forth from where I'm going. It's the exact same thing with content. You have to have those things that are maybe in the background, or it's just assumed that they're there and people don't really notice it, but it makes them more safe and it makes you more compliant. That's how you have to plan for this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree. Awesome. So, following along those lines, let's look at some of the steps. Let's the three of us talk about some of the steps that folks can take that are listening in right now, and in relation to Canada, all across Canada, but also on a provincial level, looking at all of the things that we talked about. And the idea of knowing the regulations, we talked about PIPEDA, we talked about GDPR, which of course is a global one. The idea of knowing the regulations and where can we go to look for these things? Where can we go to learn about these things? And, I can do web surfing, of course, and I can go out there and look at this, but to know the regulations, and the customers that you guys are dealing with, what are some of the pointers that you can give the folks out there in relation to this?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, folks that are attending this webinar are taking the first step. That you are getting educated. There are many different organizations that you can subscribe to, both at the national level and international organizations. AIPP and different organizations where you can take actual courses and get certifications, so that you can not only educate yourself but also certify yourself in some of those requirements. We will be very happy to upload some information regarding what organizations we would recommend looking into, and we'll put them in the share folder as soon as we're done with the webinar today. And it's our obligation. And also, these are not static regulations. There's interpretation. How may a provincial body interpret the local regulation? What was the latest holding? What would have to issue advisories? These are things that it's our obligation to really stay informed and stay current. Otherwise, we are going to fail at those obligations. And then it's obviously very important to impart the same sense of urgency and obligation amongst the stakeholders, and really make, whether you are using part of the systems or you're using your HR systems where you have access to very sensitive personal information, protected health information, electronic records regarding family relations and the like. Those are highly confidential documents, so folks need to really be aware of how to handle them. But not just the people who have immediate use to those or immediate access to those, but rather those in the organization at large. Because if you get hacked and you are just a user in a different department who didn't follow protocol, didn't follow the internal policies, and you drilled on the URL that somebody sent you on that link, you're exposing all of this highly confidential information potentially in the entire organization. So you have to identify the opportunities. What are the opportunities? What are the teams that I should be working with, and how can they help educate the rest of the organization? Is internal security running tests and see which teams or which individuals tend to drill down on those links that are, look fine, but upon closer inspection, they will appear to be from a nefarious party. Are you seeking advice both internally? Are you talking to your CIO? Are you talking to your legal team, IT, and so forth when you feel that you need advice? And are you going to outside experts when you have questions or you want to validate that your policy, that your system is appropriate?
Yeah, Joel, you brought up a really good point there, and actually that's something that some of the most successful customers who use box governance that I've talked to, and many other companies, the most effective thing I've heard is, one CIO told me, I made it everyone's problem. He created a virtual team across legal and compliance, brought in some of the line of business users, and basically said, we're going to get together in a room. We'll meet weekly, we'll meet monthly, whatever it takes. But we'll define how people are using the systems, what they're trying to get out of it, what the compliances we need to meet are, what are the risks of all the different options. And you literally create this sort of virtual or cross-functional team, and when everybody's being held accountable for the outcomes of it, and you literally have all the different inputs, it's much, much easier to build a comprehensive strategy that, for lack of a better term, covers your ass and also meets the needs of people to let them get work done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's bring everybody together, look for the opportunities, get the advice when you need it, find the people and the resources that you need, right? And most of all, keep it simple. And of course,
yeah,
this is going to sound like a shameless plug, I know, and thanks to folks like you, come to sessions like this. This is another great step, is you come to sessions like this through organizations like AIIM to learn, and go to to sites like AIIM and look for the resources there. I know that we've done a lot of great things in research, in particular for things on GDPR, and I know that I've personally written about some things related to PIPEDA as well. So Absolutely. Steps to take is basically take the steps, right? Take the first steps. And go look.
And along with that, Bob, obviously innovation is relentless, right? I mean, if there's one thing that, I don't want to get philosophical, but the universal constant is change. So things are changing.
Yes.
New technology is being invented. New functionality is being added all the time. That's one of the beauties of the cloud. When you have a cloud application or using a cloud platform, that updates and upgrades are pushed, can be even on a daily basis. So new functionality that is very helpful is introduced, and at the same time, with the ability to do more or do greater things or reach out or provide greater services or reach out to more people, that comes also with the obligation to use that wisely and within your policies. And ensuring that the organization is educated as to how that is supposed to be used and what their obligations are.
Yep. And I know that you over at Box, I know that you guys have some resources available as well. How'd you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the things I really like to point people towards is just that 5 Steps to Good Governance ebook. It's a really light read, I promise. I know a lot of this stuff can get really into the weeds, but it lays out some of the things that I think we just discussed on the last slide, honestly, and simple steps you can take to just start building your plan, figuring out who to talk to, and moving forward. And I cannot stress this enough. Information governance, meeting your compliances, it's a crawl, walk, run situation. You have to get started somewhere and keep moving forward, whether it's through a virtual team or whether it's just through your own sheer force of will. You got to do it, and we do have a team up in Canada that's ready to help anyone and everyone with their compliance needs, especially around how they manage their content. So please reach out to Cassidy if you have any questions about how Box can help, or just or want to touch base with some of our country resources up there to just help you guys get moving.
Yep. And I know that ebook, The 5 Steps to Good Governance, I know that's available to the folks that are sitting in with us right now. If they go over to the resources list to the right of this slide area, that book, along with a couple of others, are available to them right now, and they would be able to download that right today.
Right, and also shameless plug, it's on our website, box.com, if you want to head over there.
All right. At this point, I think what we'll do is we'll turn it back over to Teresa. And Teresa, you want to take it from here?
Thank you. We do have a few questions that have come in, and eager to get to those here. So let me pull that section up. And do feel free to go ahead and type in any in that Q&A box, any other questions that you may have. We're going to do our best to get to all of these here. And so one of the questions, someone's asking about, with private or public companies, just trying to broaden the question a little bit. The private or public companies in Canada, those that are seeking to comply with the PIPEDA requirements. Can you discuss what the underlying principles or what those requirements are? Can you just briefly touch on that?
Yeah, sure. So there are general principles that apply to companies not only when you're holding data internally, but obviously most importantly as well when you have the data and that is being transferred internationally. And there are several principles. For example, you have to all beginning with accountability, identifying the purpose, ensuring that you have the consent, ensuring that you only have limited collection, and the like. So to clear one misconception first and foremost, let me address that because this is often a source of confusion. It's the idea that you cannot transfer data to Canadian personal information to offshore locations for processing. For example, if you use a vendor that is based abroad, and unlike Box where you have the ability to store data locally in Canada, that information may be processed abroad or stored abroad. In fact, that is not the case. You are allowed to do that unless you are one of the very few federally regulated entities that are in critical sectors. So, but you do have the obligation to ensure that they meet the general requirements and they meet the general 10 principles that are available in the PIPEDA text for you to be able to show that that vendor that you're using, that service provider, is in fact comply with those requirements. And so, and a related question that often is associated with that is, well, if I am transferring data from one province to another or internationally, then I have different regulations that apply to me, and how can I possibly meet regulations, the local regulations, as well as the regulations that apply, but maybe from a different province or from a different federal entity altogether, a different jurisdiction. And there are about 120 countries that have regulations in the world that have data privacy or data protection regulations, including data privacy regulations. So it's impossible to meet to the letter of the law these 120 different sets of regulations. No, but can you meet the majority of them, and can you meet the most important ones by adhering to the highest bar of data protection? And I will say that my argument to that will be yes. And so if you comply, you adhere to the requirements, you observe the elements of PIPEDA, and you look into the requirements of, for example, the GDPR, and I will argue that these two are really the high bar of data protection internationally, then I think that you will have met the majority of regulatory requirements anywhere.
Okay, and I'm also, in listening to you speak with this, I think it's just worth reiterating that if you're following good information governance practices along with the security and privacy of the data, to have your documented records management file plans, destruction plans, and adhering to all the documentation that you have for your records management and information governance planning, that will go a long way from a legal compliance standpoint.
Yeah, definitely.
And it is important to ensure that the service provider or platform or application that you're looking at actually has documentation showing that they meet these requirements, right? That they have certifications, they have third-party, independent third-party certifications, perhaps approval certifications from at the local level or the national level. For example, do they comply? Do they have binding corporate rules so that they can legally transfer data as a controller or processor from the EU to Canada, where you are, or the United States, when you are providing services to European individuals? Mm-hmm. And do they have third-party audit certifications where their systems have been inspected, they have undergone pen tests and other inspections that are carried out or audits, and are those available for you to look at? And are these parties really independent? Is it somebody who has the appropriate standing in the community to issue those certifications?
Yeah, if companies won't give you their SOC reports for SOC 1, 2, or 3, or their ISO compliances, and they say they have them, that should be a red flag. So definitely make sure you can review those.
Okay. I have another question coming in, and someone's asking that if their business that's in an industry that's not heavily regulated or not regulated at all. Mm-hmm. Would they be subject to audits, and if so, by whom, for the data compliance?
Yeah. So I think the unfortunate answer for that one is it depends. There's definitely a lot of third-party consulting firms that will audit you for security, whether it's data center or just physical security. There's a lot of companies that do that. From a compliance point of view, I think sometimes it comes down to just to the government. So, for example, in the U.S., the Department of Labor has the right to audit any company's hiring practices. So you have to be able to maintain all those records in the right way. And the Canadian equivalent, there are similar laws that just basically prove that you're not biased, you don't have unfair hiring practices. So there's some of these things might be ad hoc, or sometimes I think you can reach out and engage those organizations to do it. But it depends what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. I have time to squeeze in one more question here. Someone's asking that how can Canadian companies leverage the latest, most effective technologies while maintaining their data protection obligations under the Canadian laws and regulations?
Yeah, so I'll kick off this one. Again, it comes down to the type of or the system or the company you're using. So I would certainly argue cloud is the way to go. Obviously, I work at Box, so we're all in on the cloud. But that's the easiest way to get the most up-to-date security, the most up-to-date compliance, and the quickest and easiest ability to meet your regulatory needs. Because as rules and regulations change, it's much easier for companies that don't require you to go out and buy hardware and install it in your data center to just push out solutions that help you meet that. So cloud first for sure, and then I would say you have to choose a platform or a solution, especially with content management, that really takes compliance and security seriously and puts that above the other things that they're working on. So pick a platform that's compliant and is continually working to be more compliant and more secure, because you can always keep doing that no matter what, and that'll help keep you up to speed.
And I think this is key. That's why cloud platforms are superior, because they're able to quickly and effectively issue updates and upgrades or patches to any issues that may arise. In addition to, of course, add additional functionality. So it's our view for sure this vehicle to be able to run your business on.
Okay. Well, thank you. We've been listening to Josh Rosenberg and Joel Benavides of Box, and also Bob Larrabee of AIIM. And I just want to mention a couple of other things before we get to some closing statements here, because we're getting close to the end of our webinar hour. As always, AIIM has our annual conference, and it's coming up in San Antonio, Texas in the U.S., and that's coming in April of 2018. And we do have registrations open now. We have some early bird pricing available. So go to the aimconference.com website for more information. But also just realize that my team is working to get some exciting keynote speakers lined up, along with a lot of great educational sessions, and the roundtable discussions are a huge hit. So put this into your budgets for 2018 to come to the AIM conference. And also want to mention that AIM offers a variety of training programs, live and instructor-led, as well as online and self-paced classes. In our talk earlier today, we were talking about educations and ways you can learn more. And so you can thoroughly immerse yourself in the kinds of classes and training offerings that AIM has. And we can even arrange for a trainer to come to your place of business and provide custom perspectives specific to your organization based off of our training programs, so to have that private instructor-led opportunity. So all that information can be found at aim.org/training. And Bob, if you can help me remember, I know our training department is in the process right now of launching a brand new course, and I know it's
actually several brand new courses. They're in the process of launching several new courses. So I would strongly recommend, come on out to the AIM website and take a quick look. Lots of great stuff going on out there.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for helping me refresh my memory what all that the folks are working on. I can't keep up with them.
Lots of great stuff going on, yep.
Yes. Well, we are getting to the end of our webinar hour here, and we have been recording things. And so I do invite you to come back and listen to this again, because we'll have the replay posted to the AIM.org's resources webinars page in just a few days. And don't forget to download all of the resources that are listed in that resource list to the right side of the slide area. And also when the webinar is over, greatly appreciate it if you take that survey. It'll open up on your desktop or you can click on it right now. I greatly value your feedback and would just love to hear from you. And I also want to thank our underwriter box. Without the support from our solution providers, AIIM wouldn't be able to bring you these free educational programs like our webinar series. So thank you, Box, for your sponsorship of our webinar. And as we bring this webinar to a close, I do want to leave you all with our speakers' closing thoughts or key takeaways. So I'm going to start first with the folks from Box. So Josh Rosenberg, your closing thoughts.
All right. So I guess it goes back to something I said earlier, but information governance and how you work on data privacy and security and compliances like PIPEDA, it has to be something that you're continually working at. You have to build a proactive strategy and put the really tough, hard things to do at the end. Crawl, walk, run, build a team, and basically build some small victories, get some momentum, and then you can really start dealing with the gnarly compliance things down the road when you have a lot more buy-in. So don't get frustrated and just keep pushing forward and be proactive about it.
Definitely. Most of us do not have the luxury. Most of us do not have the luxury to start fresh from a brand new company with no data whatsoever and have everything in place to begin collecting that properly and use it properly. But there are obviously many steps that we can take. So I would recommend running your risk analysis and based on that, using the right systems that will allow you to ensure that the data is used and protected in the right way, and be a partner to your service providers, engage with them, and find out how they can best help you to effectuate appropriate data protection.
Thank you. That was Joel Benavides of Box. And now Bob Larrabee from AIIM, your closing thoughts today.
Well, I would have to agree with both Josh and Joel. Basically make it a team effort. Start by trying to learn what the regulations are. Spend some time with your corporate lawyers, your attorneys that you deal with in your organizations. Go out there and spend some time on the internet to find out what these things are. But most of all, bring folks together in your organization as a team, sit down, talk about it, figure out what you need to do, and most of all, don't be afraid to reach out and find some help. Look for the expertise that you may be lacking. It's okay to say, I'm not sure what to do, where to start, where to go from here. Talk to organizations like AIIM. Come and look at our website. Look for information on GDPR, PIPEDA, and all of those things that you're going to have to deal with. But also reach out to the solution providers. Go to companies like Box. And these guys deal with it every day with customers just like you. They've been there, they've done it, they've seen it. They know what the best practices are. And so sit down and talk with them about it and say, look, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Here's what I'm faced with. What have you seen? Help me get started, get off the starting blocks. And I think you'll find that, once you get in motion, it's going to be, in some cases, hard. But then again, once you get things moving and once you get it done, you'll find out that it was well worth it.
Thank you, Bob. And I think that's a great closing thought here for today. So thank you, everyone, for your time. From AIIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we'll see you on our next webinar. Have a great day.